On June 4, 1942, before dawn broke over the Pacific, young Japanese pilots were settling into their cockpits aboard 4 aircraft carriers, taking in deep breaths of the morning air. Meanwhile, others were receiving final briefings and studying target maps one last time in ready rooms. Elsewhere on deck, mechanics and crew members were making crucial adjustments to the planes that would soon be launched into history. Unbeknownst to them, 240 miles northeast, American carriers were already preparing for takeoff by turning into the wind. In a matter of hours, Japan's planned decisive victory over U.S. carrier power in the Pacific would unexpectedly turn into one of its greatest defeats. 4 Japanese carriers that had previously triumphed at Pearl Harbor would be sunk, along with 3,000 irreplaceable crew members and pilots. This battle marked the culmination of 6 months of Japanese victories, but also signaled a shift in the war's momentum. In early April 1942, 2 months before Midway, Admiral Yamamoto was embroiled in intense debates with the Naval General Staff in Tokyo. Despite public perceptions, things were far from smooth sailing. The December attack on Pearl Harbor, despite its tactical success, had failed to sink any American carriers. This failure weighed heavily on Yamamoto's mind. The USS Enterprise and USS Lexington had been absent during the raid and continued to pose a threat 6 months later by launching strikes against Japanese forces across the Pacific. To make matters worse, on April 18, American B-25 bombers launched from the USS Hornet appeared over Tokyo in what became known as the Doolittle Raid, an unprecedented humiliation for the Japanese military's pledge to safeguard the emperor. Although physical damage was minimal, the raid triggered a psychological crisis among Japanese leadership regarding the vulnerability of their homeland. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who led the Pearl Harbor attack, faced criticism not only for failing to launch a third wave at Pearl Harbor and locate the American carriers, but also for allowing Tokyo itself to be bombed. The demand for immediate action was overwhelming, yet Japan's military leadership remained deeply divided. Within the halls of power, 2 distinct strategies were vying for supremacy. The Naval General Staff, known for its cautious and conservative stance, favored a southern expansion strategy, focusing on reinforcing their control in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea while severing the supply routes between America and Australia. Conversely, Admiral Yamamoto had a different perspective, driven by both opportunity and urgency. He possessed knowledge that few others in Japan truly comprehended. Time was running out for them. During his tenure in the United States, where he studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché, Yamamoto observed American industrial prowess firsthand. He witnessed the vast steel mills of Pittsburgh, the expansive shipyards of Newport News, and the boundless agricultural fields that could sustain millions of workers. Once America's war machine reached full capacity, Japan would face overwhelming material superiority. In documented conversations with Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoye in 1940, Yamamoto stated, "If ordered to proceed, I can guarantee a tough fight for the first 6 months, but beyond that, my confidence wanes." This prediction later proved remarkably accurate. In another verified statement from September 1941, he warned, "For a time we will enjoy dominance in every direction, like an octopus extending its tentacles, but this phase can last no more than 1.5 years." To address the looming crisis, Yamamoto proposed Operation MI, targeting Midway Atoll. Despite its small size, just 6 square miles of coral and sand, the island held strategic significance as America's westernmost outpost and served as a vital refueling station for submarines and aircraft in the Central Pacific. For Yamamoto, however, the real value lay in using Midway to lure American carriers away from Pearl Harbor. When they arrived to defend Midway, Yamamoto believed that his superior fleet would engage them in a decisive battle, fulfilling Japan's long-held doctrine of Kantai-Kessen. The plan was intricate and potentially overly complex, involving coordinated operations spanning thousands of miles of ocean. It included an invasion force tasked with capturing Midway, a carrier strike group aimed at destroying American air power, a main fleet comprising battleships including Yamamoto's flagship, the formidable Yamato, and even a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands to confuse the Americans. A total of approximately 200 ships made up what would be Japan's largest naval fleet ever assembled. The operational directive, which spanned over 700 pages, was distributed only days before the departure, leaving subordinate commanders little time to thoroughly study it. Despite significant opposition to the plan, efforts to oppose it were ultimately unsuccessful. In early May, Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki, Chief of Staff to Yamamoto, conducted war games that revealed alarming outcomes. During these exercises, American carriers appeared sooner than anticipated and inflicted substantial damage on the Japanese fleet. However, the umpires disregarded these findings by arbitrarily reducing the number of hits attributed to the Americans while resurrecting sunken Japanese ships in the simulations. When Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, who had masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack, raised concerns about the operation's complexity and the carrier's vulnerability, he was dismissed. This overconfidence, born from 6 months of consecutive victories, had infiltrated even the most brilliant minds within the Imperial Navy. The Japanese wrongly believed they had sunk 2 American carriers at the Battle of Coral Sea in May. In reality, only 1 carrier, the USS Lexington, had been destroyed. They also assumed that the USS Yorktown was so severely damaged that it would be out of commission for months, unaware of the intensive repair efforts underway at Pearl Harbor involving 1,400 workers who labored day and night to restore Yorktown within just 3 days, a feat unmatched by Japanese shipyards. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, tasked with leading the carrier strike force, harbored deep reservations about his role. Not naturally inclined toward naval aviation due to his background as a torpedo specialist and appointment based on seniority rather than expertise, Nagumo had never felt entirely comfortable commanding an air fleet. His caution at Pearl Harbor prevented a 3rd strike that might have destroyed American fuel depots and repair facilities. Now, he was expected to oversee an even more intricate operation with forces increasingly worn down by previous engagements. Since the attack on Pearl Harbor, his carriers had been engaged almost non-stop, hitting targets in Darwin and Ceylon, while supporting operations across the Indian Ocean to the Coral Sea. The air crews were worn out, and the ships required extensive maintenance. Most worryingly, Japan's recent defeat at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May had exacted a heavy toll on their forces. Although tactically it was considered a Japanese victory with the sinking of the Lexington, strategically it was a significant setback. The carrier Shikaku suffered severe damage and would need months to repair. Her sister ship, Zuikaku, lost so many aircraft and pilots that she could not participate in the Midway operation. Consequently, 2 of Japan's most capable carriers would be absent from the crucial battle ahead. In discussing this with his chief of staff, Captain Ryunosuke Kusaka, Admiral Nagumo expressed concerns about being overextended. The Americans had ample time to prepare, and Japanese pilots were fatigued while they lacked knowledge regarding the whereabouts of American carriers. Yamamoto was taking a grave risk with the fate of Japan. Perhaps the most critical flaw in the Japanese plan lay in their intelligence and mindset. Unbeknownst to them, the United States had deciphered the Japanese Navy's JN-25 billion code by Commander Joseph Rochefort, stationed at Haipo in Pearl Harbor since early 1942. The Americans were privy to details of Operation MI, which targeted Midway, confirmed through intercepted messages indicating that Midway was under water shortage stress via secure cables. This allowed the U.S. Navy to position its forces strategically. Japanese submarines deployed to detect American ships leaving Pearl Harbor arrived too late, as the American carriers had already slipped through undetected. Operation K, intended for reconnaissance by flying boats over Pearl Harbor, was canceled when a submarine discovered American warships USS Thornton and USS Preble occupying French frigate shells near their refueling point. This spot had served Japanese aircraft in March during a raid on Oahu, but Admiral Nimitz had since taken preventive measures. One by one, potential warning systems were neutralized, leaving the Japanese blind to the impending American ambush. Radio intelligence noted heightened American submarine activity and increased communication around Midway Island. The ease with which U.S. forces located Japanese ships during the Coral Sea battle hinted that their codes might have been cracked. However, these warnings were disregarded. One staff officer remarked, "The Americans are too incompetent to crack our codes and too timid to engage unless they have overwhelming superiority." He concluded that the Americans would only attack Midway after Japan had already secured it, ensuring their destruction. On May 27th, which marked Admiral Togo's victory over Russia at Tsushima, Nagumo's carrier strike force, known as the Codebreaking, set sail from the inland sea. The fleet consisted of 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Huryu, Flying Dragon, and Soryu, Blue Dragon. These ships carried 248 aircraft, including 21 Zeros being transported to Midway Island, along with 225 operational planes for combat, piloted by the world's most experienced naval aviators. This was the same force that had devastated Pearl Harbor and wreaked havoc from Hawaii to Malaya. Despite his recovery from an emergency appendectomy, Commander Minoru Genda served as Nagumo's air operations officer. In his diary before departure, he wrote, "We leave with heavy hearts. The operation is rushed, our intelligence is inadequate, and the plan is overly complex. But we are samurai who will fulfill our duty even if it leads to death. May the gods protect Japan, for I fear this mission may lead to disaster." Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, a key figure in the Pearl Harbor attack, was undergoing an emergency appendectomy aboard Akagi during late May. The operation left him too weakened to participate in combat operations, depriving Japan of its most experienced strike leader at a crucial time. This neglect epitomized their misplaced confidence. Based on subsequent accounts from fellow officers, Fuchida observed the preparations for the mission from his sickbed with increasing anxiety, feeling that something was amiss about the entire operation. The timing, the plan itself, and even the atmosphere seemed weighed down by a sense of impending disaster. Nonetheless, it is important to note that historians caution against taking Fuchida's post-war statements at face value, given that contemporary research has cast doubt on several of his claims. On June 3rd, just before dawn, north of Midway Island and approximately 600 miles away, the Aleutian Islands offensive begins. Rear Admiral Kakujikakuda's secondary carrier strike force, comprising the light carriers Ryujo and Junio, launches an attack against Dutch Harbor in Alaska. This diversion is intended to draw American forces northward while Nagumo targets Midway. However, unbeknownst to the Japanese, the Americans have not been misled by this ploy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, armed with intelligence from his codebreakers who had uncovered the true objective, has kept his carriers near Midway. The elaborate ruse succeeded only in deceiving the Japanese themselves. Meanwhile, Nagumo's carriers are navigating through thick fog en route to their launch positions while maintaining strict radio silence, which prevents coordination among widely dispersed forces. In the ready rooms, pilots receive their final briefings. Lieutenant Joikai Tamanaga, slated to lead the first wave of attackers, reviews reconnaissance photos of Midway one last time. Despite their poor quality, these images reveal the airfield, fuel tanks, and defensive installations on the island. However, they fail to show recent reinforcements, the extra aircraft, bombers, and most critically, a radar station capable of detecting incoming Japanese planes from over 93 miles away. That same evening, American PBY Catalina flying boats detect parts of the Japanese invasion fleet 700 miles west of Midway. This initial sighting sends shockwaves through the American command. Ensign Jack Reed, piloting a PBY, makes contact at 925 and reports. Main body sighted, bearing 262 distance 700. Despite this alert, Nagumo's carriers remain undetected due to weather conditions and distance. On board one of the cargo ships, tension is high as Chief of Staff Kusaka approaches Nagumo on the bridge. "Sir, if the Americans have detected our invasion force, they might be more vigilant than anticipated." However, Admiral Nagumo dismisses this worry. He believes that spotting the invasion fleet is part of the plan and will lure them into action. "Tomorrow, we intend to eliminate their air power over Midway Island, and when their carriers come to retaliate, we will be ready for them." As Nagumo speaks confidently, 300 miles northeast, Admiral Raymond Spruance aboard USS Enterprise calculates the probable location of Japanese carrier forces. The American carriers are precisely where they shouldn't be according to Japanese projections. They are already at sea and in position, preparing to launch their assault. Task Force 16 under Admiral Spruance, consisting of USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, along with Task Force 17 commanded by Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, and the recently repaired USS Yorktown, have reached a designated rendezvous northeast of Midway undetected by any Japanese reconnaissance. The weather is clear, with calm seas providing ideal flying conditions and excellent visibility. At exactly 430 hours, cargo ships begin launching their first wave against Midway Island. Lieutenant Tamanaga leads the attack force consisting of 36 Mitsubishi A6 million Zeros, 36 Nakajima B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers, and 36 HI D-3A Val dive bombers into the sky. They circle once over the fleet before heading southeast towards Midway, approximately 240 miles away. As these aircraft take off, Nagumo makes his first crucial decision of the day. Despite doctrine recommending a full deck strike to maximize impact, he retains 108 aircraft, Kate torpedo bombers and B-5N Kate level bombers armed with Type 91 torpedoes and 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs, for any potential American ships that might appear. This decision seems prudent but will prove disastrous. Below decks in a cargo ship's hangar, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida watches the launch from his sick bed while recovering from an appendectomy. His tactical expertise and experience are sorely missed during these critical moments. According to accounts from other officers, Fuchida expressed significant reservations about the operation, though his exact words remain unverified in contemporary documents. At 500 hours, Nagumo launches search planes, deploying only 7 aircraft to cover a vast expanse of ocean. In stark contrast, American forces have more than 3 dozen PBY aircraft on patrol for the Japanese fleet. Crucially, a search plane from the heavy cruiser Tone, designated as Scout Number 4, tasked with searching the area where the U.S. carriers are located, takes off 30 minutes late. Different sources attribute this delay to issues with the catapult, while others blame engine troubles or bureaucratic holdups. This lone mechanical failure will set in motion a chain of events leading to disaster. Paradoxically, recent research indicates that if the plane had launched on schedule, it might have failed to locate the American task forces anyway. At 5:34, Lieutenant Howard A.D., piloting a PBY, spots the Japanese carriers and sends an urgent message declaring enemy carriers. He provides additional details at 5:52. Two carriers and battleships are bearing 320 degrees, approximately 180 miles away, on a course of 135 degrees with a speed of 25 knots. On the Enterprise, Spruance makes a pivotal decision that will shape the battle's outcome. Despite the extreme distance, nearly 200 miles, he orders an immediate strike to catch the Japanese at their most vulnerable moment as they recover their Midway-bound aircraft. Meanwhile, at 5:53, radar on Midway picks up the incoming Japanese assault force 93 miles out. Air raid sirens blare across the small island, and all available aircraft are scrambled into action. Bombers to attack the enemy fleet and fighters to defend against the approaching threat. The defending Marine pilots launch 20 obsolete Brewster F-2A Buffaloes, 7 Grumman F-4F Wildcats, and 4 F-3F biplanes. They face overwhelming odds with their escorting Zeros numbering about 4 times more aircraft than they do. The engagement occurs at 6:16. Major Floyd Parks, leading the defenders, makes his final radio call from above. Hawks at Angels 14 supported by fighters. The ensuing clash is swift and devastating for the outnumbered Marines. With their superior maneuverability and seasoned pilots, the Zeros easily penetrate the Marine fighter formation. In a matter of minutes, 13 Marine fighters are downed, 4 critically damaged, and Major Parks is among those lost in the battle. The Zeros suffer only 3 losses. By 6:30, Tominaga's assault force reaches Midway. Dive bombers and level bombers execute their missions with precision, igniting fuel tanks, destroying structures, and cratering runways. However, as Tominaga circles to evaluate the damage, he notices a disturbing sight. American aircraft continue to take off from what was presumed to be a destroyed airfield. Although the runway is damaged, it remains functional, and crucially, none of the American planes were caught on the ground. They had all been launched before the strike arrived. At 7 o'clock, Tominaga radios Nagumo, requesting another attack wave. This message reaches Nagumo at exactly 7 o'clock, just as the first American counterattacks begin with 6 TBF Avengers and 4 B-26 Marauders armed with torpedoes. The Zeros are tasked with intercepting these planes in combat air patrol mode. 5 Avengers and 2 B-26 bombers are shot down, but Lieutenant James Murray's B-26, nicknamed Susie Q, manages a daring run at an aircraft carrier after releasing its torpedo. Multiple Japanese witnesses, including bridge personnel, report that the bomber streaked along the length of the carrier's flight deck, with gunners firing and killing 2 sailors. The plane pulled up just in time to narrowly miss hitting Nagumo and his staff, who were ducking for cover as it passed by. Murray's plane was riddled with more than 500 bullet holes and suffered significant hydraulic fluid loss, yet it managed to return safely to Midway Island. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Herbert Mays's B-26, severely damaged, crashed into the ocean near a cargo ship's bridge, possibly aiming for a deliberate ramming attack. This incident had a profound psychological impact on everyone involved. Captain Kusaka would later recount that the Admiral was visibly shaken by it. The thought of an enemy plane nearly hitting their bridge felt like a divine warning from the war god. Further American attacks followed in quick succession, including 16 Marine dive bombers led by Major Lofton Henderson, who perished during his squadron's assault. Another wave consisted of 15 B-26s and 17 high-altitude bombers, alongside 11 Marine Vindicators. All these attacks were repelled with heavy losses inflicted on the Americans, but they succeeded in disrupting Japanese carrier operations, making it difficult for them to conduct flight activities efficiently. At 7:15, Admiral Nagumo faced a critical decision. His reserve aircraft were armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes designed for naval warfare against enemy ships. However, Tominaga urgently needed support at Midway Island, and no American carriers had been spotted yet. After intense deliberation with his staff, Nagumo issued an order that would ultimately prove detrimental. He ordered the replacement of torpedoes with land attack bombs. This decision violated Admiral Yamamoto's explicit instructions to maintain readiness for anti-ship operations. Below deck in all four carriers, chaos ensued as ordnance crews started the tedious process of removing Type 91 torpedoes and 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs to replace them with smaller land attack munitions. In violation of safety regulations, the removed torpedoes were stored haphazardly in hangar spaces, instead of being returned to the magazines far below deck due to time constraints. Fuel hoses crisscrossed everywhere as aircraft were refueled. According to a mechanic named Airman Mori, who later testified about his experiences, if he had survived, the hangar deck resembled an active bomb factory. A single misstep would mean our demise. At 728, the situation abruptly shifts. The delayed report from Scout Plane Number 4 arrives, stating that 10 enemy surface vessels are heading towards Midway at a bearing of 10 degrees, approximately 240 miles away, on course 150 degrees and traveling over 20 knots. Nagumo immediately orders an identification of the ship types. It takes 12 excruciating minutes for confirmation. In the meantime, rearming operations proceed without pause, causing hangar decks to become progressively more congested with ordnance. At 745, a new wave of American bombers descends from VMS Beatwo 141, led by Major Henderson, comprising 16 Marine dive bombers. The Zeros intercept and shoot down 8 aircraft, but are compelled to engage in continuous evasive maneuvers due to relentless attacks, hindering further flight operations. Trapped in an untenable predicament, Nagumo's fighters are running critically low on fuel and ammunition from defending against ongoing assaults. Additionally, Tominaga's returning strike force will soon arrive with depleted resources. The deck is cluttered with aircraft undergoing rearmament, while American surface ships, possibly carriers, are somewhere nearby. At 809, the scout plane finally provides a definitive report. 5 cruisers and 5 destroyers constitute the enemy fleet. Relieved to learn there are no carriers, Nagumo resumes preparations for a second Midway strike. However, at 820, another message disrupts his composure once again. The adversary is escorted by a carrier that appears to be part of their fleet. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, who commands the 2nd Carrier Division from Huryu, promptly alerts Nagumo at 830 hours about this sighting. He advises launching an attack force without delay. Recognizing the imminent threat with great clarity and decisiveness, Yamaguchi urges immediate action. However, every passing minute exposes his forces to greater peril, yet Nagumo remains hesitant. Nagumo's aircraft are in disarray. Some carry bombs, others torpedoes, while many remain unarmed. Additionally, his fighters need to land and refuel. The returning strike led by Tominaga is nearing. Launching an attack now would result in a fragmented assault without fighter protection, a departure from Japanese carrier doctrine. Despite being ill from recent surgery, Commander Minoru Genda supports Yamaguchi's urgency for a prompt launch. According to eyewitness accounts from staff officers, Genda argued that haste was essential and advocated for launching whatever forces were available immediately. However, Captain Kusaka advises against this approach, stressing the risks of piecemeal attacks without proper coordination. He suggests waiting until all aircraft are recovered, rearmed, and refueled before mounting a coordinated strike. Nagumo, known for his cautious nature and adherence to protocol, agrees with Kusaka's recommendation. He orders all carriers to recover their returning aircraft, properly arm them, and then proceed northward to engage the enemy. This decision, while logical and prudent, ultimately proves disastrous for the combined fleet's air wing. This choice, which appears sound but is fundamentally flawed, seals the fate of the Codebreaking. As Tomonaga's aircraft start landing at 837 and are immediately directed to refueling and rearming stations, the hangar decks become hazardous zones. Fuel lines crisscross the area, while bombs and torpedoes are haphazardly strewn about as elevators continuously transport planes up and down. In the chaos of preparing for a new wave of launches, safety measures are entirely disregarded. The initial arrival of American torpedo bombers goes unnoticed until it's too late. By 920, 15 TBD Devastator aircraft from Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8 VT-8, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, appear on the horizon. Flying obsolete planes at just 100 knots and barely above sea level, they confront the entire Japanese fleet without fighter escort. The Zero fighters on combat air patrol descend like predators upon their prey after hours of defending against land-based attacks. The outcome is a complete slaughter. One by one, the vulnerable torpedo bombers are picked off. All 15 planes are destroyed with only 30 crew members surviving, and just one, Ensign George Gay, who will hide under his seat cushion in the water, witnessing the rest of the battle unfold from there. No torpedoes find their mark, but Waldron's sacrifice is not for nothing. The Zeros are drawn down to sea level, focused on engaging the torpedo planes exclusively. At 954, another wave of 14 TBD Devastators from Enterprise's VT-6, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay, arrives. Once again, the Zeros swarm down upon them, shooting down 10 and allowing only 4 to escape unscathed. Not a single torpedo hits its target in this second attack either. At 10:12, Devastators from VT-3 on the USS Yorktown, led by Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey, commence their assault. 10 more planes are shot down, but no torpedoes find their mark. Of the initial 41 torpedo bombers that launched the attack, only 6 managed to survive. It appears as though another futile and devastating loss has been inflicted upon the American forces. On the Akagi's bridge, a sense of relief and celebration prevails. The Japanese carrier fleet successfully repels the American attacks with significant losses on their side. Admiral Nagumo orders his strike force to prepare for launch at 10:30, believing victory is within reach. However, unbeknownst to them, 2 squadrons of SBD Dauntless dive bombers are converging from high above, undetected by the Japanese defenses. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading a group of 33 dive bombers from the USS Enterprise, had ventured beyond his intended interception point in search of the Japanese fleet. This risky maneuver, which risked depleting their fuel reserves, eventually led him to spot the destroyer Arashi, which was depth-charging the submarine USS Nautilus and heading straight towards the Codebreaking formation. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie's 17 dive bombers from the USS Yorktown arrived from a different direction at the same time. At 10:20, lookouts on Akagi shout warnings about incoming hell divers. However, it is too late for any effective countermeasures. The decks of the Japanese carriers are cluttered with fueled and armed aircraft, while bombs and torpedoes are scattered throughout the hangar spaces, leaving the carriers extremely vulnerable. At 10:22, McCluskey initiates his dive from an altitude of 14,500 feet, followed by his squadrons rolling into their attack dives. The rising sun emblazoned on the carrier decks below grow larger and become clear targets against the crystalline blue sky of the Pacific morning. Lieutenant Commander McCluskey leads his bombers in a strike against Kaga, while Lieutenant Richard Best directs his division towards Akagi. Meanwhile, Leslie's Yorktown dive bombers descend upon Soryu. The Japanese carriers are caught off guard by these simultaneous attacks, still reeling from their evasive maneuvers and with decks packed with aircraft ready for launch, making them highly susceptible to the incoming onslaught. 4 bombs hit Kaga in quick succession. The first, a 1,000-pound bomb, detonates close to the bridge at 1022, killing Captain Jisaku Akata and his senior officers on the spot. The second bomb impacts the flight deck midships, drilling through to the hangar where fueled planes ignite in a series of explosions. The third and fourth bombs transform Kaga into an inferno within minutes. By 1030, the carrier is engulfed in flames, with ammunition exploding and aviation fuel feeding the blaze. Akagi receives a single direct hit from Lieutenant Best's bomb at 1024, which penetrates the flight deck and explodes among 18 refueling and rearming aircraft on the upper hangar. The ensuing chain reactions of improperly stored ordnance are devastating. Torpedoes explode, bombs detonate, and aviation fuel creates an uncontrollable firestorm. Bridge personnel report that within 2 minutes, temperatures in the hangar deck surpass 1,000 degrees Celsius. Soryu sustains 3 direct hits on its hangars at 1025 from Lieutenant Leslie's bombers. The precision of the attack destroys 13 aircraft, 3 Zero fighters, and 4 fuel tanks on the flight deck. Below decks, stacked torpedoes and bombs cause secondary explosions that rip through the ship's vital systems. Captain Ryusaku Yamamoto remains steadfast at his post despite the intense heat. According to Chief Petty Officer Abe's testimony, the captain was last seen on the bridge, standing with a soaring hand and singing the national anthem, Kimigeo, as flames engulfed the command area. Soryu is separated from the other ships by several miles due to cloud cover. Admiral Yamaguchi swiftly plans a counterattack, but finds that 3/4 of Japan's carrier-based air power has been wiped out in just 5 minutes. At 1058, while the 3 burning carriers continue to smolder, Yamaguchi launches 18 dive bombers and 6 Zero escorts under Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi's command. Tracing back the American aircraft's flight path, they locate Yorktown at 1200. Despite fierce opposition from Wildcat fighters and anti-aircraft fire, they manage to inflict 3 bomb hits on the carrier, leaving it adrift, ablaze, and listing heavily. Damage control teams work feverishly, and remarkably, Yorktown manages to get underway within 2 hours at a speed of 20 knots. Aggressively, Captain Okada Yamaguchi prepares another assault with his remaining forces. At 1331, only 10 Kate torpedo bombers and 6 Zero fighters are available for the mission, led by Lieutenant Tomai Tominaga. During the earlier Midway strike, Tominaga's left fuel tank was damaged. Maintenance personnel managed to refuel his right tank in a short time frame. When given an opportunity to switch planes, Tominaga declined, asserting that every aircraft was crucial. He is aware that this sortie will be one way due to insufficient fuel for the return journey. At 1430, Tominaga's small squadron locates Yorktown, which has reduced its speed to 19 knots following extensive damage control efforts. American fighters engage the formation vigorously. Despite his plane being engulfed in flames from fighter attacks, Tominaga maintains course until the very end. According to eyewitness accounts by American pilots, his burning aircraft continued its torpedo run and released a weapon before plunging into the ocean. 2 torpedoes strike Yorktown at 1445, tearing through her port side and causing a severe list of 26 degrees. This time, the damage proves irreparable. Later that day, at 17:00, a squadron of 24 dive bombers from Enterprise arrives on scene. 4 bombs hit Yorktown at 17:03, turning it into an inferno once more. On the tilting flight deck, Yamaguchi assembles his crew. According to survivors, he expressed regret for the loss and encouraged them to persevere and rebuild a stronger navy. He then retired with Captain Tomio Kaku to the bridge. Both chose to go down with their ship, and their bodies were never found. Yamaguchi's final message to Nagumo included an apology for the defeat and a prayer for Japan's fortune in future wars. He received a posthumous promotion to vice admiral. Throughout the night from June 4th to June 5th, the remaining Japanese vessels attempted damage control, but their efforts proved futile. Soyuz sank at 1913 on June 4th, claiming the lives of 711 men. Kaku followed suit shortly after at 1925, with 811 sailors joining them in the depths. Yamamoto, still aboard his flagship Yamato and more than 600 miles away from the action, finally acknowledged defeat around 200 on June 5th. He sent out a signal canceling the occupation of Midway and ordering a retreat. Despite the intense fires raging through the night, Akagi managed to stay afloat until dawn. At 500 on June 5th, after all survivors had been evacuated, Japanese destroyers fired 4 torpedoes at her. She sank with 267 men still aboard. Similarly, Hiryu remained defiant and was scuttled by the crew at 510 after enduring an intense night of fires. With this final blow, she took another 392 sailors and both admirals to their grave. As the sun rose on June 5th, the cream of the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier fleet lay at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in waters over 17,000 feet deep. Among them were 357 men, including 2181 who perished aboard the carriers. Kaku lost 267 sailors, while Hiryu claimed an additional 392, and Soyuz took another 711 with it to the bottom. Another 792 died on heavy cruisers when Makuma was sunk, resulting in 700 fatalities, and Megami being damaged with 92 casualties after a collision during night operations that left them vulnerable to American aircraft. Critically, only 110 of these losses were from air crews. The majority of pilots were saved, but the more significant loss was over 700 skilled aircraft mechanics and flight deck crew whose knowledge had taken years to accumulate. Those rescued by destroyers are promptly isolated from the rest of the fleet to prevent news of the tragedy from spreading. They are confined below deck and prohibited from communicating with others. The disaster is not yet fully resolved. On June 6th, Lieutenant Commander Yohachi Tanabe's submarine, Eminis 168, locates the damaged Yorktown while USS Vireo is alongside it providing assistance. Tanabe had been observing the morning attacks through his periscope and was off Midway reporting weather conditions. Moving at 3 knots, he slips past the destroyer screen undetected. At 1331, Tanabe launches a salvo of 4 torpedoes from a distance of 1,200 yards. 2 strike Yorktown, while another hits the destroyer Hammond, which is providing power support. Hammond breaks in half and sinks within 4 minutes, taking 80 lives, many due to its own depth charges detonating. Despite receiving 2 more torpedo strikes, Yorktown remains afloat for a time before rolling over and sinking at 7:01 on June 7th in waters approximately 16,650 feet deep. The act of sinking the carrier that played a significant role in defeating the WWII provides scant comfort against the enormity of Japan's defeat. Meanwhile, during the night of June 4th, heavy cruisers Megami and Makuma collided while trying to avoid submarine attacks while bombarding Midway. American aircraft discover them on June 6th. Mikuma is sunk with a loss of 700 lives, marking the highest death toll among Japanese ships at Midway. Megami, heavily damaged and with 92 fatalities, barely manages to return to port. The disaster has reached its full extent. The voyage home is marked by silence and shame. Wounded sailors from the carriers are confined to separate compartments to isolate them. Discussions about what transpired are strictly prohibited. Upon the fleet's arrival at Hashirajima Naval Base in Japan on June 14th, they dock discreetly under cover of darkness. The injured crew members are unloaded secretly and classified as confidential patients, then sent to secluded naval hospitals where they face a near-imprisonment-like isolation from their loved ones. They are barred from any contact with the outside world. According to sources at the U.S. Naval Institute, these individuals were treated abysmally, viewed as disgraced failures. The survivors of the air groups are promptly reassigned to distant outposts in the South Pacific, without being allowed to reunite with their families or friends. Many will perish in subsequent battles over the Solomon Islands. Carrier personnel are scattered across various ships and bases, bound by oaths of secrecy under threat of severe consequences. The official cover-up commences immediately. Propaganda preparation is underway for the government. Sunken carriers continue to appear on operational rosters as unmanned vessels to uphold the illusion that they still exist. No flag officers face repercussions such as court-martial or even formal reprimands, as acknowledging their involvement would entail admitting defeat. Information regarding the defeat remains concealed from the Imperial Japanese Army for a full month. Even Prime Minister Heike Tojo is unaware of the true scale of the disaster. On June 5th, while the ships were still ablaze, Tokyo Radio announced to the nation that the naval and air forces had inflicted significant damage on American fleet and air units in the Central Pacific. Subsequent broadcasts claimed another decisive victory for Japan, with reports stating 2 American carriers sunk. The loss of one carrier, Kaga, was barely acknowledged at first, followed by a later admission of Soyuz's destruction. Full recognition of these losses would not be made public until after the war concluded. The Japanese populace celebrated jubilantly on the streets, blissfully unaware that their joy was misplaced. It wasn't until June 10th that hints of trouble began to appear in Tokyo newspapers, which used ambiguous wording to suggest operational difficulties while still upholding the illusion of a grand triumph. Commander Fuchida, recovering from an appendectomy and burn injuries sustained during a ship's destruction, was visited by a naval intelligence officer who sternly warned him, "You are not permitted to speak about what occurred." The official narrative insisted on portraying it as a significant victory. Post-war accounts, which must be approached with caution due to uncertainties regarding Fuchida's reliability, report that he responded with sardonic comments about the futility of constructing war based on falsehoods. This conversation cannot be independently corroborated. Admiral Yamamoto retreated to his cabin aboard the battleship Yamato and remained there for 3 days. His staff could hear him pacing late at night, tormented by his failure. In a diary entry later discovered after the war, he confessed his despair over Japan's dire situation. Staff officers who served under him recalled that Yamamoto fell into deep depression, realizing the war had become unwinnable. Yamamoto's prediction to Prime Minister Kenoi that Japan would run rampant for 6 months before facing reversal proved tragically accurate. Midway, which took place exactly half a year after Pearl Harbor, marked the turning point. During a private meeting with his staff documented by Captain Kurashima, Yamamoto spoke candidly. "I gambled and lost. In attempting to destroy the American carriers, I have lost our own. The war is not yet over, but I fear we no longer possess the means to win it." In a letter penned to his close friend Admiral Takechi Hori that survived the war, Yamamoto reflected on the defeat at Midway. He asserted it was not due to bad luck or numerical inferiority, but rather stemmed from Japan's overconfidence and poor strategic planning. They had underestimated American capabilities while overestimating their own. This hubris would now come back to haunt them. Yamamoto predicted that within 18 months, the situation would become hopeless. His prediction would turn out to be overly optimistic. Within 18 months, Japan would lose control of the Marianas, and American B-29s would be within striking distance of the home islands. The true cost of Midway extends far beyond the loss of 4 carriers and 357 lives. Japan had lost over 100 of its most experienced pilots, men who had accumulated years of training and combat experience from China to the Indian Ocean. These aviators cannot be easily replaced, as their rigorous 2-year training program is insufficient for producing combat-ready pilots. Equally devastating was the loss of more than 700 skilled aircraft mechanics, armorers, and flight deck crew members, individuals whose expertise had taken decades to develop. They knew every detail about their planes and understood the intricacies of carrier operations under combat conditions. As Admiral Yamamoto noted in his diary, later captured and translated, building new carriers takes only 2 years, but training pilots with the same level of experience is impossible, and replacing skilled maintenance crews will be equally challenging. The true tragedy of Midway lies not in the ships that were sunk, but in the lives lost. Japanese naval aviation never fully recovers from this blow. 2 years later, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, inexperienced Japanese pilots would face a crushing defeat known to Americans as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Flying against seasoned American pilots with superior aircraft, they lose over 600 planes while inflicting minimal damage. The seeds of this disaster were planted at Midway. Midway marks the turning point for Japan's expansionist ambitions. Despite propaganda efforts, reality sets in within Imperial General Headquarters. Plans to invade Fiji, Samoa, and Hawaii are quietly scrapped. Operation FS, intended to sever supply lines between America and Australia, is abandoned. Instead, Japan finds itself embroiled in a defensive war it cannot win. Confident Americans begin planning their counteroffensive. 2 months from now, Guadalcanal will mark the beginning of a long and brutal American offensive towards Japan. The psychological ramifications are equally severe. The myth of Japanese naval invincibility, meticulously fostered since their triumph over Russia at Tsushima in 1905, is shattered irreparably. Commander Tamechai Hara recounted in his memoirs that after the Midway battle, "We never felt confident again. We entered combat expecting defeat, while the Americans anticipated victory." The war's psychology had fundamentally shifted during those 5 critical minutes when our carriers were hit. Internally within the Navy, intense but unspoken recriminations began immediately. Despite following established doctrine, Admiral Nagumo was made a scapegoat for the loss and received only brief assignments thereafter. By 1944, during the American invasion of Saipan, where he commanded ground forces, Nagumo committed suicide rather than face capture. In his diary, Admiral Yamamoto noted, "Nagumo is finished as a commander." The blame must fall somewhere, but it cannot be Yamamoto. The defeat also exposed fundamental flaws in Japanese military culture. These include inflexibility in thought, an inability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances, and blind adherence to doctrine even when conditions change. All of these cultural traits that contributed to the defeat were recognized, but could not be rectified. The same rigid hierarchy and mindset that led to disaster at Midway would repeat itself time and again throughout the war. Post-war analysis revealed a series of cascading failures leading to the catastrophe. The Japanese operation was overly complex, with forces spread out over vast distances, unable to support one another effectively. Strict adherence to radio silence prevented any coordination when plans went awry. Intelligence capabilities were woefully inadequate. The Americans had a clear understanding of the Japanese plans thanks to their ability to decode intercepted messages, whereas the Japanese were unaware that American carrier forces were already at sea. This failure in reconnaissance was particularly detrimental, with only 7 search planes tasked with monitoring an expansive ocean area, compared to more than 30 American PBY Catalinas. The imbalance was stark. The cancellation of Operation Case reconnaissance mission due to the presence of American vessels near French frigate shoals further compounded the issue. Additionally, the submarine patrol arrived too late to detect the departure of American carriers from Pearl Harbor. Moreover, there was a crucial half-hour delay in launching the Japanese scout plane. Individually, each oversight might not have been fatal, but collectively they ensured a catastrophic outcome. Perhaps most significantly, the Japanese vastly underestimated American capabilities while overestimating their own strengths. They believed that the Americans could not decipher their codes, yet this assumption was incorrect. Furthermore, they thought the USS Yorktown could not be repaired in time, whereas it was made operational within 72 hours. Another critical miscalculation was their belief that American pilots would be intimidated, a notion dispelled by the Midway battle where American dive bomber pilots demonstrated remarkable effectiveness. The Japanese also assumed that American carriers would arrive after they had captured Midway, but in reality, the Americans were waiting in ambush. The shortcomings in damage control efforts were equally revealing. The Japanese carriers, with enclosed hangar decks and inadequate firefighting systems, became deadly environments once struck by enemy fire. In contrast, American carriers, featuring open hangar decks and superior damage control measures, showed greater resilience even under heavy attack. The USS Yorktown endured significant punishment, but might have survived had it not been for the submarine strike. Japanese carriers suffered catastrophic fires from single hits due to poor fuel system design and inadequate ammunition handling procedures. Admiral Yamamoto's tenure following Japan's defeat was brief and fateful. On April 18, 1943, American intelligence decrypted his travel itinerary, leading to the interception of his aircraft over Bougainville by P-38 fighters, which shot it down. His demise exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid that set the stage for Midway seemed almost poetic. Discovered in the jungle still strapped into his seat, Yamamoto carried with him a profound understanding of how Japan's fate was sealed during those critical moments at Midway. In one of his final letters to a friend who survived the war, Yamamoto expressed remarkable clarity about Japan's strategic errors. He acknowledged that wars are not won solely by spiritual fortitude. They require both tactical and strategic intelligence, as well as the ability to act upon it effectively. Unfortunately, Japan lacked these essential elements. The nation was too proud to consider that American forces could anticipate their movements, too rigid in its approach to adapt when plans went awry, and overly confident about the security of its codes. Pride indeed precedes a fall, and Japan's arrogance had no bounds. Consequently, the outcome was unavoidable. Midway's greatest irony lies in the fact that it accomplished Yamamoto's objective, but for the opposite side. It became the decisive battle he envisioned, yet it was Japan rather than America that emerged decisively weakened. The doctrine of the decisive naval engagement upon which Japanese naval strategy had been built for 4 decades proved correct, but it was the Americans who triumphed in executing it. According to documents from Japanese military archives, Yamamoto genuinely feared the industrial prowess of the United States. In early 1942, he warned his staff that a military victory over an unprepared adversary offered little genuine pride. Rather, it should be seen as a matter of shame for having been caught off guard. It would be better if you waited until observing the enemy's actions before forming an opinion, as it is guaranteed that they will respond with a vigorous counterattack once provoked and infuriated. During the Battle of Midway, this retaliatory effort materialized with remarkable precision and destructiveness. The Americans had not only recuperated from the attack on Pearl Harbor, but also managed to turn Japanese tactics against them. Although the conflict would persist for 3 additional years, its ultimate result was essentially determined during those pivotal 5 minutes on June 4, 1942. However, beyond strategic ramifications, Midway was fundamentally a profound human tragedy. In the waters approximately 325 miles northwest of Midway Island, 357 Japanese sailors and airmen lost their lives. These young men had penned farewell letters to their loved ones earlier that morning, shared meager meals like rice and tea for breakfast, and harbored hopes of triumph and reunion with family. They perished amidst flames reaching temperatures up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, drowning in oil-choked waters, or being ripped apart by explosions audible from miles away. Lieutenant Hashimoto, one of the few survivors from Akagi's engine room, testified during post-war investigations about the harrowing experience. The cries of burning men continue to haunt his nightmares as he recalls their desperate pleas for help and mercy. Fire obstructed passages, ladders melted in the intense heat, leaving him unable to assist those suffering. All they could do was listen as fellow sailors and airmen met their end in excruciating pain. The anguish of these voices echoes through every night. Back home, families received notifications stating that their sons had died honorably for the Emperor in a glorious victory. Windows adorned with gold stars bore testament to parental pride over this supposed sacrifice, unaware it was actually made during a defeat that sealed Japan's fate. The truth only came to light after the war, compounding grief with feelings of betrayal. Even then, many families refused to accept the reality, having been subjected to such extensive misinformation. Petty Officer Tanaka, who managed to survive when Soryu sank, remembered the morning before the battle with deep reflection. We were brimming with confidence and even joked about which American ship we would sink. Yamada boasted he would destroy a battleship, while Suzuki declared he would shoot down 5 American planes. Both young men were only 18 years old, but they perished when the bombs struck. Their bodies never recovered. Occasionally, I wonder if they are still at their posts in the depths of the ocean, waiting for orders that will never arrive. Today, the remains of 4 Japanese carriers lie beneath more than 5,000 meters of water. Their precise locations were only identified recently by renowned deep-sea explorer Robert Ballard and his team. These sunken ships serve as war graves, silent testimonies to the consequences of hubris and the true cost of conflict. The aircraft that once launched from these carriers to wreak havoc across the Pacific now lie crushed in their hangar bays, while the bones of their crews remain at their battle stations, eternal sentinels of vessels that will never set sail again. From a Japanese viewpoint, Midway was the moment when grand visions of empire crashed violently into harsh reality. This defeat proved that spiritual fortitude alone could not triumph over material inferiority, and demonstrated that bravery without strategic acumen leads to calamity. Rigid thought patterns cannot adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, as evidenced by Japan's fate at Midway. It was a fateful encounter with destiny, one that turned out to be unyielding. The loss of the carriers shattered more than just ships and lives. It also dispelled illusions. The myth of Japanese invincibility, the belief in spiritual superiority over material might, and the notion that sheer determination could overcome any obstacle all vanished along with the sunken vessels. In their place came a sober realization. Japan had initiated a war it was destined to lose against an adversary it had profoundly misjudged, employing tactics outdated by modern warfare. From the ruins of defeat emerged a new Japan, one that rejected war and embraced democracy, becoming a force for peace and prosperity. The samurai ethos, which once fueled conquest, now drives innovation. A country that once aimed to dominate the Pacific now contributes to its stability. What was once used to construct aircraft carriers is now employed in manufacturing automobiles and computers. In this metamorphosis, perhaps the sacrifice of the 3057 who perished at Midway was not entirely in vain. The Battle of Midway serves as a cautionary tale for all nations about the risks of overconfidence and rigid thinking. The Japanese military, despite its tactical genius and courageous personnel, fell victim to its own success. Victory disease, assuming that past strategies would always succeed, underestimating enemy actions, and believing that superior morale could overcome material disadvantages, affected decision-making at every level. The Navy that had executed the Pearl Harbor attack with brilliance just 6 months earlier now failed in basic reconnaissance, disregarded intelligence warnings, and fell into a trap that should have been evident. Reflecting on Midway from the Japanese viewpoint reveals not villains, but individuals caught in the machinery of war. Brave pilots who flew to their deaths with courage, if not wisdom. Commanders making decisions under immense pressure and incomplete information. Mechanics working tirelessly to prepare aircraft they would never see again. Sailors battling uncontrollable fires until their last breaths. Their story should be told not to glorify defeat or war, but to remember the cost of military aggression and the price paid for imperial ambitions. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, despite concerns about his post-war reliability, may have captured an essential truth when he became a Christian evangelist after the war and dedicated his remaining years to promoting reconciliation. Though his specific accounts must be approached with caution, his transformation from architect of Pearl Harbor to advocate for peace mirrors Japan's journey. From aggression to pacifism, from empire to democracy, and from isolation to international cooperation. The lesson of Midway, viewed through Japanese eyes, is ultimately that no nation, regardless of its power, can afford to underestimate its enemies, overestimate its capabilities, or ignore the evolving realities of warfare. The carriers deemed invincible at Pearl Harbor proved fatally vulnerable at Midway, and pilots who had previously encountered no resistance met their match in American dive bombers. The tactics that had proven successful against fragmented adversaries were ineffective against a unified and well-informed opponent. Ultimately, the waters that engulfed the Japanese carriers at Midway would also be responsible for eradicating the militaristic ideology that sent them there. The young men who perished believed they were fighting for their emperor and empire. They could not foresee that their sacrifice was paving the way for a new Japan, one that would become peaceful, prosperous, and democratic. Although their efforts had no tactical significance or strategic success, their deaths demonstrated the futility of military aggression and the impracticality of sustaining an empire through force. This narrative from the Japanese viewpoint describes a tale of arrogance leading to downfall, where human errors compounded into disaster and young lives were lost due to miscalculated strategy. This story must be shared not to glorify defeat or victory, but to commemorate the immense cost of war and the price paid for imperial ambitions. In time, those same waves that submerged the Japanese carriers would cleanse the nation of its militaristic stains, leaving behind a transformed country with a lesson for all humanity. Aggression ultimately leads only to destruction, while genuine strength lies in peace rather than conquest. Both Japanese and American spirits hovering over Midway remind us that war is neither glorious nor triumphant. It is tragic. Maintaining peace, despite its challenges, remains preferable to even the most decisive military victory. In the vast Pacific, where the sunken carriers lie eternally silent, only the ceaseless movement of waves carries forward the solemn reminder. Regardless of who emerges victorious, war leaves nothing but loss in its wake.